Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this webinar. We will start momentarily. We'll allow a moment for folks to join us, and then we'll get started. All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to begin this webinar. My name is Amanda Zapata, and I'm a Senior Marketing Manager here at CFP Board. I'm happy to welcome you all to our Successful Study Strategies from CFP Professionals webinar today. Today, we'll hear from 3 CFP professionals about how they studied for the exam, the strategies they employed for success, and we'll touch on what they did to stay on track with studying and managing their time effectively, managing outside obligations, work-life balance, approaching study plans, and much more. We hope you will benefit from hearing from these CFP professionals who have been in your shoes preparing for the CFP exam before. If you have any questions for our panelists, please post them in the Q&A box. We'll reserve some minutes at the end of this webinar to take some questions from the audience. All right, let's get started with our panelists. So we have 3 CFP panelists, Madison, Sasha, and Erin, and I'd like them each to briefly introduce themselves so you all understand where they are coming from. Madison, do you want to go first?
Absolutely. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today. I'm Madison Watson. I successfully passed the CFP exam in July of 2022. It was my 3rd attempt. I had attempted in July of 21 and November of 21 unsuccessfully. And my, my big, value add here is going to be what I switched up and how I approached it differently to have a successful 3rd attempt, so that I can hopefully save some of y'all some attempts and really make sure that you have a successful roadmap ahead of you.
Awesome, thank you. Sasha, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Sasha Decker. I took the exam for the first time in March 2023 and was very grateful to pass on my first attempt. I'm actually a career changer, so I moved into financial planning from education, very different, and took a few years to prepare for the exam. And I received my certification officially actually 1 year ago today. So that's my backstory.
Congratulations, that's so exciting. The 1-year mark, very exciting.
Yeah, thanks.
And Erin.
Hi, my name's Aaron Anderson. Been a financial planner for about 10 years now. Started as a paraplanner, and also, like Sasha, was a career changer. And like her, I started in education as well. So one of the things I like to bring to the forum, if you guys aren't on it, I recommend it, is just helping people with the education side of things and the learning side of things. That's one of the reasons why I was excited when I was asked to join this panel.
Awesome.
Let me just briefly mention, since everybody else did, I've had the CFP since March of 2020 when I took my exam, I guess a month later, and you have to wait. And I took it literally 2 days before they started shutting every prometric down for COVID. So highly recommend that you take your exam early in the week. Don't push it off till the last day. That gives you some time to reschedule if you have to, or if something like a world shutting down virus comes in that you don't have to, you might be done with it by then.
Well, let's hope that part doesn't happen again.
Exactly.
Great. Now that you know a little bit more about our panelists, let's jump into our discussion. All right, let's start from the beginning. So you've registered for the exam. How did you start to organize your exam preparation? When preparing for the exam, what did you do to organize? Did you start studying right away? About how far out did you start studying and developing that study plan? Erin, why don't we start with you?
Okay, so at the time I did, you do all your research, you want to see what to expect. And so people were suggesting at the time to take about a year. And so that's what I did. I started August of 2019, doing the education portion and planning to take the exam November of 2020. And so kind of recommend on anything we really are talking about here is just to be flexible, because what I found out as I started taking courses is at the time, I guess I had been in the business about 5 years. There's a lot of my experience and education that I've already had helped me get through a lot of the material a lot quicker than I expected. And so I started doing November 2020. Then I said, you know what, I probably can get this done in July. And then I said, hey, you know, well, maybe how about March? You know, it's going to be tight, but maybe I can fit it in. And so it took me about 7 months, but just from start to finish. And each person is different. You may plan for a year, and things come up in life, or if something happens, or you're struggling with some of the material or whatever, and you might want to take longer, and that's okay too. A lot of courses have a timeline already set up. So once you pick your provider, the provider might say, you know, this course starts on this day, and it's going to take you this much time to get through it. And of course, then you're following their timeline. The program I used was self-study, so you could take as much time or as little time as you need to.
Awesome. Thank you. That's very helpful. Sasha, what did you do when you registered? What did you do to start organizing your preparation?
Yeah, well, it's funny because my timeline was pretty much the opposite of Aaron. Like you said, everyone's different. So I actually took 3 years overall as a career changer with no experience in the financial planning field. I knew I needed to spend some time learning everything. So I spent about 2.5 years on the education portion. And then when it came down to preparing for the actual exam, how I organized that, I had heard, and I think this is a pretty good guideline, that you needed to spend at least 200 focused hours of study after finishing the education in order to prepare well for success. And I wasn't really interested in spending 2 months cramming. That's just not really my style. So for me, I started the exam study about 6 months before the test, so in September of 2022. And I actually, like a lot of financial planners, I'm kind of a spreadsheet type of a person. So I had a spreadsheet to keep track of how many minutes I spent, so that I could make sure I was on track for my 200-hour goal. So I kept track of that pretty diligently. I generally set myself a goal. I wanted to spend a certain number of minutes reviewing my textbooks, do a certain number of practice questions, maybe a certain number of flashcard minutes. And I tried to spend some time on at least 2 of those things every day. For me personally, some people, depending on their past industry experience, might find that they some subject areas are easier and they don't really need as much review, let's say in insurance or investments, if that's been a specialty for a while. For me, since I really needed equal amount of work in all the fields, because as a career changer, it was all kind of equally equally needed attention for me. So I just bounced back and forth between the different subject areas throughout those 6 months in the way that I reviewed. But I would definitely recommend that, if possible, keeping track of your hours so that you know if you're on track for that 200. Not that there's anything magical about that number, but I think realistically, that's pretty much the minimum amount of study time that it takes to get ready for this, and you kind of want to know if you're on target. So
That's good advice. Definitely helps you just kind of stay on track, whether, their target number is different or not, right? Whatever that is, like you said, Sasha, right? It
sure, yeah, I know some people. Yeah, some people say 300. I mean, I ended up a bit over 2, not including my review course weekend. But
yeah, I think that's very helpful. We get a lot of questions from candidates on, what kind of is your study timeline. So I think that's very helpful.
Yeah.
If I could just piggyback on something Sasha said with the timeline, my timeline was more like getting questions correct, I guess. Proficiency timeline, I guess, would be the thing, since it was self-study. When I needed to slow down, I'd slow down. When I was doing well on the questions, I'd speed up. And so that might be a way that you can keep to a timeline without saying, okay, I'm going to spend 3 months on this course, and you find yourself getting bored because it's taking too long, or you spend 3 months and think, oh man, I'm stressed out now because I'm not getting this. And just adjust your speed based on your comprehension can make things a little bit easier to keep you motivated.
I would also add to, this is Madison, I would also add that when you're approaching this exam, whether it's your first time, your fourth time, doesn't matter, just give yourself plenty of time. Obviously, like Erin had mentioned, like if you're pacing well, you're getting a ton of questions right, you really feel like you're getting through this material at a solid pace, absolutely don't, psych yourself out and try to extend when you take your exam and push it out. However, it's okay to give yourself time and not rush to the finish line. Because I think that is a mistake that I had made in mine. I spent a little over a year on the education portion, took my first attempt and was 3 out of 8, then immediately took it again the next cycle and was 5 out of 8 sections passed. And just realized after talking to a ton of people and helping people after I had my successful attempt, if you're someone who might be newer to the industry, or maybe it's just taking a little bit longer to grasp these concepts, that's completely okay. And for me, on my third successful attempt, I needed 7 months to prep for that exam because I went back through absolutely everything and I didn't want to leave one stone unturned. So I switched up my resources and I switched up my process. And I think that was huge for me. So I think it's good to keep in mind that whether you're someone who has just come out of the education and maybe is taking 3 months to prepare, with a review course and then immediately taking the exam, that's fine. If you really are pacing through it at a rate where you're getting questions right, you feel like you're grasping the material. But if you're waiting for, your live review for the light bulb to go off and you're worried like, oh shoot, it's not going off, that is okay. I'd give yourself more time than not.
Yeah, I think that's helpful to hear too, Madison, right? That you don't have to just cram it all in, right? It is an exam to plan for.
Exactly. It's a beast of an exam. It's one where, it's doable. We've done it, whether it's, first attempt or multiple attempts, but it's a doable exam, but should be respected with the amount of time. So, I know plenty of people who have done it, in the 2 to 3 month mark, but I also know a ton of people that needed more time, and that is okay if you're one of those people. This is not an exam where it's a race to the finish, who can get it done quickest.
And Erin, I like what you were saying about proficiency, right? Like, definitely take time to go through and know strengths and weaknesses. So that way, right, areas to help you focus on, or areas that not necessarily to not focus on, but just to be able to say, okay, I feel good in this area. Let me move on to some of the trickier parts and then come back, make sure I, study everything, of course, but, kind of keep track of strengths and weaknesses along the way.
Yeah, exactly.
Very similar to what we were just talking about in terms of putting together a study plan. A concern we hear from candidates while preparing is how to stick to a schedule between work and other personal obligations. Sasha, you said that you had put together a spreadsheet to keep track of your study hours. And, Erin, I know you were working at the same time that you were taking the exam, and Madison, right? You were doing all this plus, grappling with multiple attempts on an exam. So my question for you all is, how did you manage your time between work, personal, and other obligations while keeping track of a study plan and knowing what you had to do to prepare for exam day? Madison, do you want to go first?
Absolutely. I would start off by saying, just remember why you're doing it. I know we say this to our clients all the time, like remember your why, right? But same thing when you're attempting this exam. Remember why you're doing this, whether it's to have doors open for you for your career, whether it's to prove to yourself that you can do something like this, or to set an example for your family, whatever it may be, remember your why, but then also, like, if this is your priority, make it your priority and remind yourself, how bad do you want this? Because that's what's going to be reflected in your study hours. Now, of course, I'll be the first to say, I know for a fact it's not fun to study every day. I know for a fact it's not fun to take this test multiple times. But what I can tell you is this is something I wanted more than anything. And that was reflected in how I spent my time. So especially by my third attempt, I'll tell you, between my first two, I spent over 400 hours between those 2 attempts. For me, time spent with the material wasn't necessarily the issue. It was how well was I connecting with it. So to create a study plan for my successful attempt, I knew that I had to be very, very strategic about how I was spending my hours in my day. So it looked pretty robotic for those 7 months, but it was get up, work out, work all day, immediately come home, get something to eat, study the rest of the night, and repeat. That's what my life looked like. Now, I'm big on 1 full weekend day off of studying every single week because I think your mind needs that recharge. And I'll probably come back to that point later in this panel. But I will say having such a disciplined approach is what's going to get you there. And yes, you got family obligations, you may have kids, you may have other work obligations, whatever it may be. And those can't fall to the wayside. However, for a season, this has to be the priority. It's not something that you can just say, well, I'll make it fit into my life and I'll still be successful. For most people, this has to be the 1 or 2 priority for the entire season, or it's probably not going to happen. It's a very doable thing, but you got to put it first.
That's great advice. I think that we've heard that a lot and seen that also in some of the research that we've done, Madison, right? That, you do have to manage self-care, but it is something where you also have to manage saying no to some of the other extracurricular activities, right? That maybe is part of the norm, but saying no to that for a period of time while you work on your study plan.
And knowing that those doors will open for you. There will be a time where this season is over. You're on the other side of it, and you can go to every bachelorette trip, bachelor trip, family vacation, whatever it is. You can do all that. It might be a period of saying no for 6 to 12 months, but for a lifetime of opportunity, and that's worth it.
I think that's a great thought there. Sasha, what was your experience in managing your exam prep schedule and other obligations just as part of normal life? Oh, I think maybe we lost Sasha. I'm not sure. Sasha, if you can hear us, you may be on mute. But Aaron, I will move over to you while we work on getting Sasha back.
Okay, sure. Yeah. I think Madison basically stole my answer. She must have been copying off my paper. But it is really like that. My day, I'm not a morning person, so I don't exercise in the morning. I don't study in the morning, but I get up, go to work, go to the gym most days, go home, eat some dinner, give the kids a hug and kiss, and then go study until about 9 o'clock and 9:30. And I tried to make that a hard stop because you do need some time to unwind every day. You're going to start neglecting your clients and things of that nature if you're too tired to work for them during the day. So around 9 o'clock, I'd stop and I'd veg out on some TV or something of that nature until I went to bed. So, and it was almost that way every day. It got a bit robotic is a good word, boring is another word, but it was just something that you need that discipline to keep your motivation up. Otherwise you think, well, I don't need to study today, I'll do this, or this has come up, I'll do that. I think I mentioned it later, but I'll just mention it now. There are some things that do come up that you need to plan for and adjust for. And, you want to be there for your kids' play. They're not going to be in the play next year. You're going to want to go to that. There are some things that still need to take priority in real life, but some of the minor things that you can avoid, you just have to do it for a while until you get it done.
Yeah, I think that's great. And Sasha, I'm not sure if you are.
Yes, hello.
Oh, perfect. Okay, great.
Okay,
So
I'm not sure what happened there. Yeah, sorry about that.
That's okay. The question to you is, managing your study schedule.
I've heard everything. It's been fine. Okay. Yeah. So,
Sasha, I am going to have to stop you. I'm so sorry, but for some reason your audio is not coming through.
A morning person, and I am also not a morning person, so I had to hear someone else tell me while I was getting ready to I'm so sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sound much better now.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm not sure what's going on. I'm hearing everything fine. So, you're good?
You are good. Yes, I think you can start answering whenever you're ready.
Okay, so sorry. Yeah, so what Aaron said about not being a morning person, I'm also not a morning person, so I wouldn't have wanted someone else to say this to me when I was getting ready to prepare, but I decided that the mornings were going to be the best time for me to get my focused study in because I wanted to make sure I prioritized it before work. So I got up about an hour and a half earlier than I would normally to get to work on time. And I just spent that hour and a half of study in the morning every day. very focused. It was nice and quiet and kind of cozy because it was during the winter. So it was actually kind of a pleasant experience. I was surprised, but that was really key for me to making sure I got my study time in every day, was just doing it first thing. And then after I got home from work, if I had some more energy, I would spend some more time in the evening. But if I didn't, that was okay because I had already done a couple hours of work in the morning. The other thing, I definitely agree with Madison about a break day once per week. I took Sundays off of study, and that was my time for spending time with friends or family, for going out to a movie or hosting someone for dinner, that sort of thing, just doing my hobbies. And that really gave me a chance to spend a little unwind time. And actually, till the end, I didn't study on Friday nights either. I figured I could spend as much time on Saturday as I wanted. So Friday night was, happy hour with coworkers, or just spending a little time decompressing from the week. So I think that was really vital for me to in order to stick to my long-term study plan over those 6 months, was to give myself a little bit of break time and have it scheduled in, so that it wasn't like it was optional. Oh, maybe I'll just take a break time today. Most of the days it wasn't an option, but on those days it was my own personal requirement, and that just helped me stay sane.
And
I
going
like
off
that.
of
Oh, I'm
Sasha's
sorry,
point
Madison.
there, I will say with the days off, the reason it's so important too, and this is, Sasha hit it on the head with this. You don't want to go into each day negotiating with yourself what the plan's going to be for the day. I'm big on task versus time-based studying. So if you can have a couple tasks you're going to do for the day, whether it's 50 practice questions, read 2 chapters in your pre-study book, and review old notes, whatever it may be, a couple tasks, so when you get them done, great, you can move on, as opposed to just sitting down for 4 hours in front of a book and just rereading stuff. That's not going to move the needle. And when we talk about taking those days off, the day off is so important, because I know it's going to sound like I'm asking y'all to be lazy. I'm not asking you to do that. I'm saying when you take that day off, it's going to allow you to go into the new week fresh, recharge, not running on knee, not going through the motions. And I like to use the analogy, sports is my background. So, I like to use the analogy of, an Olympic athlete. If they're training hard every single day to prepare for an event that's way out in front of them, if they go hard every single day and you said to them, yeah, go hard, but don't take a day off. No days off. They're going to say, you're crazy. My body will break down. I have to have a rest day, right? Same thing goes for your mind. You need that day to recharge, so that when you go into a new week, you're sharp when you're answering your practice questions. You can retain a lot more information. You're not just operating at 60%, but still thinking you're moving forward. That's why it's so important.
That's a great comparison. I don't know that I've heard that one before, but I really like that. I think that's really helpful for others preparing right now to hear, right, that, a plan is necessary for preparing for the exam. But, planning also breaks is extremely important. And it sounds like from each of you that, learning more about yourself and how you study is important. So maybe you're not a morning person, right? Make sure that you build a schedule that's not studying in the morning, right? And so, building a schedule that works for you, but making sure that you're actually sticking to it. And like you said, Madison and Aaron, and I think all of you hit on this, Sasha too, right? You're not negotiating with yourself. So you're writing it down so you know what you're going to do and when. Seems very important.
Right. And you can, we all have 24 hours in the day, so you can be creative with your study plan and your time. Just a couple of things I would do when I remember I said I went to the gym. I would always have some kind of podcast or something related to the CFP that I'd listen to while I'm lifting weights or walking on the treadmill. So I'm studying while I'm not studying, if that makes sense. Even when we go somewhere, I'd really want to go and be involved in this family function we're doing. But I wanted to study too. So my wife would drive and I would read in the passenger seat, and my kids unfortunately had to be told to be quiet constantly, but it's I was able to read on the way there, be present while we were there, and read on the way back. And so I was able to still study in these off times where we are doing a lot of sitting around and not focusing. So think about your times throughout the day where you're maybe have a bit of downtime, even if it's 15-20 minutes. You can do a 10 question quiz in your question bank for 10 minutes, for 15 minutes. and get a little bit of study time in.
That's great. Yeah, definitely, being creative with how to manage your time among all the obligations that everyone has. I want to move on to our next question and pivot to discussing exam resources. We've gotten a couple of questions from candidates so far about resources that you all use, so including review courses, podcasts. Erin, you just mentioned podcasts, any other review material, practice exams, whether that was through your review provider or CFP board practice exams. But I'd love to know, what you incorporated into your studying, what you thought was very useful to you, what you thought was helpful, and would love to know more about your experience with the resources that you used as part of your preparation. Sasha, do you want to go first for this one?
Sure. Can you hear me at this point?
Yep, sound good.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I used everything, including the candidate forum. I got a lot of great ideas off there, so I definitely recommend to folks who are on here, if you're not already using that, definitely get an account and look at it every day. The first thing I did was go back through my textbooks from the education, since like I said, I took 2.5 years to complete it, so some of that was a little rusty. I signed up for a review course. Personally, I used Zon. The reason I selected them was because I had a couple of colleagues in my team who had used them successfully a couple years prior. So I figured, well, if it worked for them, I'll try the same. So that came with some books. So I used those. It also came with a large question bank, a couple thousand practice questions in addition to what was in the books. I used those. Came with flashcards. I used those. The flashcards were actually quite useful because, I could tuck those in my bag or my purse when I was heading out, leave them in the seat of my car. And when I had a few spare minutes, I would pull those out and, spend 10 minutes reviewing. So those were useful. I listened to webinars like this one. I got a lot of good tips from those. And I did use the CFP board practice exam. I did that about 6 weeks before my test date. And I definitely do recommend that as a resource. It was primarily useful for me just in terms of getting used to the format of the actual test. I spent the first 10 or 15 minutes of my practice exam panicking, and I think I got like 2 questions done, and I thought, oh, this is impossible. But then it helped me. Then I was able to kind of calm down and power on through, and did pretty well on that. And ultimately, the primary thing that taught me was that I could power on through that initial sense of panic, which was useful on actual exam day. So I definitely recommend using that as well. But those are just a few of the things. I really appreciated my review course's live review. I attended a weekend. I had to fly to it. It wasn't offered in my city, but it was worth it. Just to spend those 4 hours of extremely concentrated, focused study time, getting exam tips, all of that. That was really useful as well. So I guess the short version is I just used everything I could.
I'm glad that worked out. It sounds like it was a good mix of things. Erin, what about you?
Similar to Sasha, I'd say on this kind of thing, it's really knowing yourself. I personally do not like live video classes where I feel like death by PowerPoint, where they're sitting there talking about their slide deck, and so I didn't do anything with videos except I'd watch one, or when I needed to see something in detail. A lot of times though I'd just search online for what I needed. My big thing, and if you've been on the forum and you've seen me on there, you've probably seen me post about this. Most important thing is questions, and more questions. The exam really only cares about you getting questions right. They don't care about readings and videos and podcasts. So those are really need to be your secondary focus to help you with your primary focus, which is getting questions right. So that's sort of the way I approached my studying. But again, that works with my learning modalities. If you're a visual person and you need videos, then by all means, watch the videos. If you can get it by reading, then read. I will say that, I mentioned about working through proficiently earlier and moving on. When you take your review course, just recognize that you will probably start out feeling like you've never seen any of that stuff before. I went through all the education portion and I was getting, 85s, 90s on all the tests and everything and feeling really good. And then my review course had a pre-test and I got a 60 on it. So I was like, oh, I need to really get hunkering down and learn the material there. So to kind of tie into this question, if you're not planning on doing a review course, if you just, do the education portion, review courses cost money. I don't really need to do that. I'm going to skip it. I highly recommend you don't, because the review course tends to tie it all together. Each of the education courses tend to be siloed, and a lot of the questions are knowledge-based questions, recall, things of that nature. The review courses are where they sort of tie it all together. Questions can be from multiple areas. A lot of the questions are application-based, very similar to what you would see on the actual exam. And so I do definitely recommend a review course and follow the schedule and outline that the review course gives you, and you should be okay.
Perfect, thank you. And Madison.
Yes, so I clearly had to switch up my resources for my third attempt. I will say my first two, I did do the Danko review course, and I thought it was a great course. It just, I needed something different for my third attempt. So I did switch to the Dalton review, but I also was very honest with myself. And I was like, you know what, Madison, it's not for, like we mentioned before, it's not for lack of hours of studying. I need to be able to connect with this material, and I need to be able to apply it in a way where, I often tell people, a lot of times when you're choosing, do you want to do CFA or CFP? They'll say, oh, well, CFA is a million miles deep on investments and CFP is a million miles wide and only an inch deep. I don't agree with that. I think CFP is a million miles wide and at least 10,000 feet deep on each thing. So for me, I think the CFP exam really gets folks and traps them. You'll hear about that often when you only know certain concepts, 60 to 70% of the concept, right? You're always going to choose a second best answer. So I needed to figure out, how do I learn these concepts where I can fully grasp it and answer it no matter what angle the CFP board asks me that question? Can I still get it right because I understand not just 2 bullet points about this topic, but the well-rounded concept? So in order to do that, I enlisted some help because I didn't know what to do. I went to the discussion forum and I said, hey, what do I do? And I ended up from there getting a resource. I worked with a tutor for 7 months. His name's Paul Austin. He was phenomenal. So I was able to get that one-on-one help to really kind of guide me through practice questions and a lot of the education material, because I had a lot of cracks in my foundation. So for me, I think that's what put me over the edge. In conjunction with the Dalton review of all those details and kind of pulling it all together for me, so that I was picking the best answer and not the second best answer. So that was something different. I knew I had to switch up my studies. I had to try something different because my way from the first 2 attempts did not work. So that's what I will say. I really incorporated that. I still was using, flashcards and old notes and things like that. But the bulk of it, like Aaron had mentioned, I did a ton of questions. A month out from my exam, I was doing 100 questions a day. So I think that combination really, really helped me find success.
I think these are very helpful answers. And I think that, the common thread among everyone was getting your hands on practice questions and really just making sure, right, that you understand, like you were saying, Madison, right, the concepts and, the best answer for the questions being asked. And, so taking those questions and then, reviewing them and understanding why they were right or not right, and continuing to go back and forth between the material and the questions. That's great. I think that's really helpful. We had a lot of questions from candidates kind of just on what did everyone do, right? And like I think everyone said, is every study strategy is going to be a little bit different, but I think that was very, very helpful. How did you all stay motivated to keep going, right? We've talked about exam resources. We've talked about how to manage your study plan among other obligations. I think, as you get closer to the actual exam day, you've been studying for so long or, putting in so many hours. How do you stay motivated to keep going and to stay on track and remind yourself why you're doing this? What is your biggest piece of advice or best tip for individuals who are going through that right now? Madison, I'll turn that over to you.
Yeah, so as we've mentioned, multiple times, both Sasha and Aaron have said it too, like this is going to be time away from friends and family obligations that are outside of the CFP exam. And what I kept telling myself was, first of all, again, how bad did I want this? But also that time away from family and friends was not going to be for nothing. I was not going to let the 2.5 years I had wrapped up in this be for nothing. I had to get through it. And let's be honest, I got kicked in the teeth twice. So I was not going to let anything get in my way that third time. So of course, it's not fun every day to wake up and say, yeah, let's study, let's do it. But you have to. It's what you got to do to get it done. And that was really the motivation that I needed. Also knowing that I wanted my world of opportunities to open up after this exam. So I was about bound to do anything to cross that finish line. So that for me was what kept me motivated.
That's awesome. Thank you. Sasha, what about for you?
Yeah, so I guess on the philosophical side, somewhat similar to Madison, I told myself, this is what I want. I made this career change and I had set myself a personal goal to achieve certification by the time I turned 40. So I had a timeline. And so I was working towards that goal and that deadline I'd set for myself. And I told myself, this is a season. After it's done, I'll have to achieve the goal. So, on the personal motivation side, I just, like Madison said, I kept reminding myself of why I was doing this and what I want. On the practical side, I think a couple things that helped just helped me through the grind. One was, I mentioned I had my study space and I just tried to make it comfortable. It was in the winter and it was dark. It was in the mornings, and I just I turned on the fireplace and I got some cozy blankets and pillows, and I just tried to make it a place where I would enjoy being, so that I could kind of settle in with my books. And it was almost pleasant, for the first week or so after I passed. I was like, I almost missed that time in the mornings, but I didn't really. And then on the another thing that helped keep me motivated that I would also highly recommend is I formed a study group with a few other people who were studying for the exam and who were in my area. So we did try to meet in person as much as possible. There were 4 of us. And we met every week, whether in person or on Zoom, and we went through practice questions. We talked about topics that we found confusing. We would bring a topic and say, hey, I'm just really struggling with keeping this straight or understanding this. And so that was helpful on the practical side in keeping me going, but it was also helpful sort of on the emotional support side, because, let's be real, this is not just a challenge for your brain, it's a challenge for your whole person. And that sort of social support, I think, is actually really, really key. So being able to work together with those people and kind of understand what each other was experiencing and what we were going through, have that support network, that was really valuable. It was also very exciting because all 4 of us passed, so we beat the statistics on that, and that was thrilling. And actually, we're still in touch. We still get together regularly for networking. We just enjoy each other's company at this point. So that was really really cool. And I actually connected with those people through the candidate forum by posting and saying I was looking for a in-person study group in my area. So I would definitely recommend that.
That's great. Power of personal motivation, right? Keep each other going.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes you just need the accountability and the support of others who are in the same boat and kind of, pushing each other forward towards your goal. So.
Yep, exactly. I love that. And Aaron, what about you?
Yeah, the motivation thing is a challenge. The forum is very helpful. I know we've all mentioned that a few times, but I don't really have anybody local. Although I guess if I'd have posted in the forum, there probably are quite a few that I didn't even know were nearby. But just having those people there to bounce ideas off of, answering questions, knowing there are other people in the same boat as you, can help you not feel like you're so alone while you're sitting alone studying. 2 things I used to do that helped me stay motivated. One is to have my daily plan. I've mentioned that before, but I would say, today I'm going to do 100 questions. And whether I get them right or wrong, if they're right, I'm going to make sure I was thinking the right things when I pick that answer. And if they're wrong, I'll figure out why. And if that's all I wanted to do that day, I was done. And if I was done by, I think I said earlier, I pretty much hard stopped my studying at 9 o'clock, but if I was done at 8:30, then I was done at 8:30, and it was a nice little dopamine hit to just feel like I got something accomplished. If I want to read a chapter or two, and then that's what I would do. Second thing is burnout is very real in this exam. Just so you just want to make sure you don't overdo it. I use, since I go to the gym, I'll use that as an example. Sometimes I'll take a class and I start real strong and I'm pedaling in the cycle class, real fast and everything. And by the end I'm dying. And so that can happen while you're studying. I've seen people on the forums say, oh, on Saturday I studied 12 hours. And I'm thinking, by about hour 4, you're probably not getting very much out of it, but you're going to waste your time studying another 8 hours. That maybe take a break, study 3 or 4 hours, stop, watch a football game. That's what I used to do because I was studying during football season, and then go back for a couple more hours and study some more. But just to say you studied 12 hours when it was not a productive 12 hours is just a waste of time and burns you out. It helps you lose your motivation. So
I think Aaron makes a perfect point there with being so intentional about your study hours and saying, like, if you're going to sit down and it's going to be 2 hours, make it the best 2 hours you have.
Exactly.
Don't just settle for, okay, I sat down for 8, but we're only 3 of those 8 actually really good hours. At that rate, go spend the other 5 hours enjoying your day. Really be intentional about it. If I'm going to sit down, I'm going to give it everything I got. And if I'm at a point where I can't or I'm burnt out, you take a break. I think another thing too, when we talk about timelines here, let's say you guys, have been maybe studying since February, maybe for the July exam. The worst thing you could do would be to peak in May, right? You don't want to be at your best tip-top shape because you put in so much work to peak in May. We need y'all to peak in July or whenever your, preferred exam timeline is. We want you to peak when you're taking your test, not a month or 2 before, because you will burn out before then. So it's kind of towing that line of having a plan, being disciplined about it, but also, factoring in those days off where there's times where it's like, what, this isn't going to be my best. For some of you who are sitting down for 12 hours, maybe it's 2-hour spurts that work for you, or just task driven studying.
I totally agree with that. And I would just say, this may seem kind of obvious, but in this day and age, maybe not. Just have your phone in the other room, because you can sit there for 5 hours and, 3 of them are kind of distracted by texts or whatever's coming in, or you're just feeling burnt out. So you just want to pull it up and scroll. And that's reasonable to need that break, but just give yourself the focus time with the phone in the other room, and then be done after your 2 hours, and then go, answer your texts and spend some time online or whatever. Just keep those things separate, because your brain, it really needs that focused time that doesn't have the distractions, and you can get a lot more out of those hours if they're just really focused, and then you spend less hours.
I think all of this is incredibly helpful, and I think just the motivators, the whys, keeping everything in mind, and again, just I think the biggest thing that we've heard is question banks, making sure you get your hands on a lot of questions, but also just being very intentional with your study time. Like everyone just mentioned, right? It's very important to just make sure you have a plan, going in with a plan, and not kind of leaving it to chance. But all of this has been super helpful. And what I want to do is just make sure we have enough time for questions from our audience. So I am going to just transition over to asking you all some questions from the individuals, the candidates who are listening in today. And we'll just go around similar as what we've been doing. Madison, we actually have a question that's specific for you about retaking the exam.
Okay.
What did you do to switch up your study method, or if anything? You've talked about it a little bit, but were there things that you were doing that you were just like, this doesn't work, I need to change this? And kind of how did you evaluate that?
Yeah, I think one of the main things I haven't necessarily touched on as much is just, so those pre-study books that you guys get for any, review course that you might be taking, again, I had 2 versions of them for my Danko material. I had pre-study books for my Dalton material. I had resource overload, right? But I had those books and I had read them front to back, sideways, forwards, backwards. Doesn't matter. I had read those books so many times, and I was going to, kid myself if I thought by my 3rd attempt that just spending, 3 hours a day just reading more was really going to commit it to, I don't want to say memory, but true comprehension. So I think if you're someone who's just getting the bulk of your studying just from reading, you probably are reading the paragraph saying, okay, yeah, this makes sense. All right. But then if you go to take questions, you're not getting questions right about these concepts. We're missing a step in between. And that's truly what I was missing. I could tell you that book sounds great. It makes sense to me when I'm reading it, but I wasn't connecting it when I was doing questions. So for me, that, that space I was missing was really filled by, having a tutor and rounding out my knowledge. So that's really how I switched up studying. I didn't live inside those pre-study books anymore, because truly at that point you can kind of feel like you're spending hours like a hamster on a wheel, exerting all this energy, reading, but you're not really moving the needle. So that was a big thing that I had switched up.
That's great. I think that's very helpful, and also just to acknowledge that there are things that you need to, like you said a while ago as well, right? You just need to be very honest with yourself and understand that there are things that you need to change,
Sure.
and to be successful. Erin, question for you, and I believe you had mentioned this pretty early on, but you had mentioned taking a 3 or 4 day cram course, and maybe it wasn't exactly that, but something similar, right? Did you find that helpful in terms of consolidating your knowledge?
That wasn't me.
Oh, that wasn't you.
No.
Oh, that
I
might
think
have
they
been
offered
me.
it, but yeah.
Sasha, that was you? I apologize. Sasha,
That's okay.
what was your experience with doing a course like that?
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't I wouldn't entitle it a cram course, because that is actually kind of the opposite of what it was. But it was involved with the review course that I took, the Zahn one. It includes books and lots of practice questions, several thousand. But it also includes a 4-day long weekend, 10 hours a day live review with an instructor who's, had years and years of experience in preparing students for the exam. So the live review portion was, we went through all the subject areas, but it was also very much practically focused on just exam tips, how to think carefully through the questions, how to make sure you're answering that question that's actually being asked, so that you don't get tripped up by various distractors in the question, things like that. Very practical, exam focused preparation. So you had to do the work beforehand of really learning all the material. It was not, I would not say that would be a sort of last ditch effort, like, oh, I haven't, I don't feel like I've mastered the material yet, maybe this will get me through across the finish line. But if you had spent the hours on the material, it was very helpful, just for sort of consolidating a strategy for approaching the test, and also gave me a chance. All my review was self-paced, watching videos for the coursework and everything. So that gave me a chance to ask an instructor questions, like, hey, I've always been confused about X topic. Can you just provide me some clarification? How is this likely to show up on the exam in terms of, what do I really need to know? Just that type of thing. So it was very, very helpful in that way. And I did it, my long weekend was actually only 10 days before my exam date. So it was really down to the wire. But it was still really valuable.
Thank you. I think that's very helpful. Erin, I know this question is for you because I know you mentioned this, but questions on some podcasts. Do you have any recommendations on podcasts that were helpful for you?
I liked Biff Bites. That was a pretty good one. It's been quite a few years. I know a lot of the providers now have audio type podcasts, for lack of a better word, but trying to think off the top of my head, the Biff Bites one was really good because it seemed to be toward the exam. But if you go to any podcast app and search for, financial planning or CFP, even CFP exam, you might find some things there, but definitely Biff Bites for sure. And then there might be some others. If you're on the forum and you want to post a question there, I might be able to do a little bit of research and then actually give you a better answer. But off the top of my head, for sure, Biff Bites.
Thanks. And I have also seen that on the forum, so I feel like that is what I've seen other candidates recommend as well. But yeah, definitely the community is a great place, just like Erin said. This is for any of our panelists, how did you handle big case questions? So without going into exam content, kind of how did you frame maybe how you would answer, a case study question? And hopefully you're able to talk about that again without going into exam content, but more just kind of like if there was a strategy behind it.
Oh, go ahead, Aaron. No, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I was going to say there are kind of two strategies I've seen people do. One is read the questions, then go through the case study and figure it out. And the other one is read the case study, try to memorize everything you can there, and then go through the questions. I kind of did a hybrid of that. One thing is on the exam screen, the case study is next to the questions. So I know when I was doing case studies with the different books that were available, it was a real pain in the neck because you'd read a question, then you have to go flip through pages and try to find, and then flip through more pages. So, just having them side by side helps a lot, number one. My philosophy on it was to skim through the case study, try to figure out, who we're talking about. Sort of, you can almost, after enough practice, sort of know what the questions are going to be based on the information that's given. And then, they recognize on the exam that it's not going to, that you don't have five hours, like on some of the practice ones I would do where it was 8 pages of reading and tons of data and all that. It's still a case study, but it's definitely a lot more focused. But I skim through the case study, figure out the basics, and then go and start doing questions. And I think that's the approach that tended to work best for me. Skimming through helped me figure out where stuff was located in the case study. So when I read a question, I was like, oh yeah, I remember they talked about that toward the bottom third of the case study, and I'd go kind of read through and get more details so I can answer the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Going off of Aaron, I did something similar where I went ahead and read the questions ahead of time so I could at least skim the material for what I think, they're trying to ask me. But then also keeping in mind that, like, even if, let's just say, a lot of practice ones I did would have been like maybe 8 to 10 questions. Let's just say there's 8 to 10 questions for a bigger case study. There's still questions that you could have seen, come up later in the exam. It's just a question. So take each question for what it is instead of thinking of it as, oh, I have this big mountain of a case study and I have 10 questions associated with it. Like, don't think of that. Like, take each question for what it is and just realize it's another exam question. And some of the questions you might not even need the material for, all the different attachments. So I would say just don't freak out about it. Don't think, oh, I got to save all this time for it. Yes, it will require time, but just approach each question as it's a normal exam question. But if you want to read, I did like reading the questions ahead of time. So when I skimmed the information, I wasn't wasting time on details that may not matter.
And one other useful, just little tidbit, that if you do the practice exam, you'll learn this there, but you actually can use the control find feature in the case material. So if there's a question that's about their investments, and you, instead of having to scroll through, what feels like 5 pages of content to try to find the info about their investments, you can just search for that and discover it right away. So that is helpful when you're
that's good
feeling pressed for time.
You should have told me 5 years ago.
Right, I was gonna say that would have been helpful.
One thing that's helpful for the exam that you'll see in the mock as well is you can mark questions for review. And so some people actually do that with the case study. They just say, oh, this is the case study, and they mark all the questions for review, and I come back to it later. So they don't cheat themselves out of time. I didn't do that, but what I did do is when I did a question, every question, if I felt really confident about it, I'd mark the answer and move on. If I was a little confident or, kind of iffy, I'd mark it for review and I'd move on. So that way I knew I wouldn't run out of time. Then any question I had marked, I'd go back and I'd ask myself, is this question, do I feel badly enough about this answer to change it? And if the answer is no, I left it. I kind of look at it as like video review in soccer or in football where they, it has to be irrefutable evidence to change the answer. That's sort of how I went through those reviews. But it allowed me to take care of my time so that I did not get to the end and have 20 questions left and I'm panicking trying to get them done in 5 minutes. So same thing with the case studies. If you feel like you're going to go too slowly on them, just mark them for review, finish up the section, and then go back and work on the case study.
One thing just to piggyback on that I noticed during my study was when I went back to check my answers and made a change, I had about a 50% chance of changing it to the correct answer and a 50% chance of changing it from the correct answer. So for me, that just told me, unless, like Erin said, unless there's irrefutable evidence that I made a mistake here and I missed something and I do need to change it, probably most of the time going back and changing my answer, it's going to just be a wash. So I didn't spend a lot of time, flagging questions to go back and think about it some more on the actual test, because to me that just seemed like a waste of time, essentially. So if there was one that was going to be a complex calculation and I thought, this is, if I do run out of time, I don't want to have spent 5 minutes on this, then I would flag it. But otherwise, if I just felt unsure, it just didn't feel worth it to me to go back and potentially change my answer from correct to incorrect.
That's a very helpful information, because we did have a question about, any testing tips, coming back to questions, marking for review, coming back to them later. And I think, what you all answered just now helps answer that, right? Just in terms of strategy when you're actually sitting there looking at the questions. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, but I think just everything that you did just add was very, very helpful. Couple other questions, just in the amount of time that we have. How well did you know your financial calculator before exam day?
I knew it pretty well, I'm not gonna lie. And it's not because I'm a super techie girl. It was simply because the better you know your calculator, the more you can work around. And especially with questions that are formula based, or whether it's, the mortgage amortization questions, education funding, NPV, whatever it may be. The better you know your calculator, even if you forget something, you can kind of work your way around it, or you at least know when something's not even in the ballpark of what, your answer should be. So I knew it pretty well, but I wouldn't be discouraged if you're like, oh my gosh, no matter what, I just feel like I'm not getting the calculator stuff right. It's not the entire test, but I think the better you know it, the more you're set up for success on the exam.
Yeah, I would agree. You need to know it. And there's a few basic types of questions that are going to pop up a lot in your review questions and your exam prep questions. And those are the ones that you need to know. You need to know how to do those.
Yeah, I agree. There's some basic ones that are important. This was kind of funny. My review provider said this one real complicated calculation. They said, oh, this is not really testable. It won't be on there. And it was literally on the exam. I just kind of laughed and did my best and marked it and moved on. But so don't assume,
Yep.
oh, this was
that happened to me too.
Yeah, this isn't going to be on there. It could be. What I would say is you should know your calculus. It's kind of like driving when you first were learning to drive and you got in the car and you were all nervous and you had to adjust the mirrors in the seat and now you just like hop in and back out and drive off, and you hopefully get to a point with your calculator where it becomes a tool, an extension of your brain, and not something that you have to worry about.
Yeah, and in the same vein of tools, keep in mind, obviously, for the exam, you'll be given the tax tables and those additional resources. This may sound remedial. Make sure you know how to use those tables, because, it happened to me, especially after my first attempt, where I thought I was using the tax tables right. I was not even using them right. Like, I didn't know what I didn't know when it came to that stuff. So don't just assume, oh, I've got these documents sitting, next to me on the exam and they'll help me. But I don't really know how to use it. No, know how to use them. You're going to get a lot of opportunities to answer questions correctly if you just know your way around those resources.
That's true with the formulas as well, because the formulas are given on the exam, but if you don't know how to use them, you're out of luck.
Exactly.
I think that this was extremely helpful. Everything that you all talked about and offered as advice and your experience, I know I appreciate hearing it. I'm sure everybody who listened in on the webinar today appreciates it. So I just want to take some time, Madison, Sasha, and Erin, to thank you so much for your time and sharing your insights. It is extremely valuable, and I know that other candidates benefit from hearing from this. So thank you so much for your time. We do have some other questions that we are just unable to answer in the time frame that we have. But what I will do is I will go ahead and gather them up and I'll post them on the forum. So that way, Madison, Sasha, and Aaron, if you do have a chance to answer them, you can answer them, but then also other candidates and other individuals who have passed the exam can also weigh in. So please feel free to go back to the community within the next week or so, and I'm sure you'll see answers to your questions. But again, Madison, Sasha, and Aaron, thank you so much for your time. I'll just give one last little plug. If you do have any other questions that you have for CFP board, please feel free to send us an email. And before we go, in like maybe 10 seconds per person, is there any last piece of advice that you want to offer before we head off for the afternoon?
This is a doable exam. You guys can do it. Stay motivated, stay the course. Even if your day is robotic and boring, it's all going to pay off. So you can do it.
I would just echo that. It's a season and it's doable, and there is nothing like the feeling of seeing that pass on the screen. Nothing. It's unbelievable. So just hold out hope and stay the course.
I agree with them as well. And if you have any questions, the community is a great place to put it. And if you want to just type at Aaron Anderson, I will look at it. I may not have an answer, but I'll take a look.
Thank you all again so much. I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.